cut the games. Did you take Tylenol when I was in the womb? Mom!
What are you talking about?
Did you take, when you were pregnant with me, did you take Tylenol?
Bobby, I don't remember. It's so long ago. I don't know. I probably did.
Do you realize what you've done?
Bobby, but that's what they give you.
Effective immediately, the FDA will be notifying all physicians of a medicine called Exeta. Ooh, that's a big word for Elmo. Exeta. The teleprompter's not working. You know, it's just Tylenol. We're just gonna get rid of it.
Acetaminophen. Is that okay? Which is basically commonly known as Tylenol.
Cyanide-contaminated Tylenol has been responsible for 3 deaths in the Arlington Heights area. Do not take Tylenol until further notice.
Arlington Heights police demonstrated tonight how they have been warning residents throughout the day. And in Chicago, police notified all officers of the threat.
This product may be contaminated with cyanide and should be destroyed.
At the present time, I think that would be a safe policy until further investigation, until we can perhaps determine where the contamination took place. If it were me, I wouldn't take them.
I want to take you now to Oklahoma, where a judge has ruled on a historic opioid lawsuit. Johnson & Johnson is accused of helping fuel the state's drug epidemic and has been ordered to pay $572 million. Let's go ahead and listen in.
We have proven that Johnson & Johnson built its billion-dollar brand out of greed and on the backs of pain and suffering of innocent people.
This is just one case among many. Johnson & Johnson is currently facing more than 67,000 lawsuits across the country from plaintiffs who say they developed cancer after using its baby powder and other talc products. While most of these cases involve ovarian cancer, a smaller portion, including the Moore case, focuses on mesothelioma.
Well, Johnson & Johnson, of course, is no stranger to the courtroom, with investors bracing for headlines about its cases involving both talc powder and opioids. But the news late yesterday was unexpected. A Philadelphia jury said J&J must pay $8 billion in punitive damages in a case involving its antipsychotic drug, Risperdal. Now, the damages are to a man who claims that J&J failed to warn that young men using the drug could grow enlarged breasts. Now, the company faces more than 13,000 cases concerning Risperdal, according to its most recent quarterly filing. That's in addition to the cases concerning its talc powder and opioid businesses that have been the focus of more investor attention lately.
The mother from Hopewell Junction says 2 weeks after getting the J&J shot, she had a stroke. Her hair fell out in clumps, and doctors injected her with massive amounts of steroids to help calm her body's extreme reaction.
It really made me angry. They said that the bargain brand was as good as Johnson's baby shampoo, so I bought it. It hurt Katie's eyes terribly.
Many bargain brands sting, irritate eyes. Only Johnson says no more tears.
I'll never buy anything but Johnson's again.
There's 2 studies that show children who are circumcised early have double the rate of autism. It's highly likely because they're given Tylenol. So, you know, none of this is dispositive, but all of it is stuff that we should be paying attention to.
Mexican word of the day, acetaminophen. Most of the time, acetaminophen, women by telling them to take a chill pill, especially when they're PMSing. Maybe a Tylenol will help.
Sup, sobers. So in the late 1800s, America was in the midst of its second industrial revolution. Of course, all these nuances in manufacturing and industry, they required tons of new petrochemical products. Things made from petroleum to help these machines run better, well-oiled, sometimes in order to power these machines. When making these different petrochemicals, there is a significant amount of byproducts that are released, and those byproducts either have to be disposed of properly, which obviously costs money to do, or they don't do it properly and then they end up poisoning the environment. It's just a huge loss. There's all this waste product that you are now just having to throw away, basically. Why not try and figure out something we can do with all this byproduct? Some way we can make more money, more profits off of the refining of these petrochemicals. It's these byproducts that had different chemists from all over the world working on just figuring out what they can do with this stuff. What different chemicals and compounds can they come up with using these different byproducts? One such chemist, tinkerer, researcher, professor at Johns Hopkins University is named Harmon Northrop Morse. And he is most well known for the Morse equation, which has to do with his research on osmotic pressure, like different pressures on either sides of a membrane. But picture this guy boiling some nitrophenol, some pieces of tin in some glacial acetic acid, and then out pops this crazy white powdery substance. This white powder would eventually become known as acetaminophenol. Say that 5 times fast. But apparently Professor Morse had no idea what to do with this stuff, so it got shelved, and he continued working on his osmotic research, which is what he would eventually become more well known for. Over the course of the next 10 years, something called aniline dyes would have been invented. Now, these dyes allowed us to make more colorful textiles and garments and products on a mass scale, and these colors were more vibrant, they were deeper, darker, and they lasted longer. But there was yet again significant byproducts that came from producing these dyes. Originally, this stuff is isolated from samples of coal tar, and then once it's broken down into aniline, it can be broken down even further into acetanilide. Acetanilide was originally used as one of the substances that made up the base of the sulfa drugs, which were the original antimicrobial, antibacterial drugs that they were using before penicillin. In 1886, the German physicians Arnold Kahn and Paul Hepp were working on a patient who was struggling with parasitic worms, and they were trying to see if this substance known as naphthalene would actually help him get rid of these parasitic infections. But when they went to the pharmacy, they were actually given the wrong substance. They were given acetanilide. Without realizing it, they gave this to their patient. While they were monitoring him, they realized that it wasn't really helping with the worms infection, but the fever that their patient was experiencing went way, way down. Once they realized that they were actually using acetanilide, they realized they had a very unique marketing opportunity. This was a new compound that drastically reduced fever and also seemed to have some pain relieving qualities. And it was one of the first non-opioid pain relievers at that time. So they decided to market this thing and sell it as a product called antifebrin. Everything seemed fine with antifebrin at first, but then they realized that the chemical itself actually oxidates your hemoglobin. And when it does that, it causes the hemoglobin cells not to be able to bind properly to oxygen molecules. Therefore, it can't deliver oxygen to the different parts of your body through your bloodstream like it normally does. Not only that, but it will turn your blood blue, which in effect turns your skin blue. So because of that, they decided it wasn't safe and they decided to stop using it. But obviously word had gotten out at this point that these chemists were tinkering around with these different byproducts from these coal tar-based dyes. So other chemists were also messing around with these dyes and these byproducts, seeing what they could come up with. And sure enough, another scientist named Felix Hoffmann, he's a German scientist who was hired on in 1894 to work for Bayer, which you might recognize as the company that makes aspirin. But he was doing some tests, experimentation, and comes up with a very similar compound to what we've been talking about already. And this one's called phenacetin. Now, phenacetin does very much the same things as this antifebrin drug that they had made, but it doesn't turn your skin blue. So that's a plus. Now, Bayer started mass producing phenacetin as a fever reducer, pain reliever, and it was the biggest one at the time. That was until 1899 when Bayer actually discovered aspirin, which is a very similar compound, but had less side effects and was considered less harmful and carcinogenic. So they started using aspirin as the main analgesic at the time. Aspirin would remain the analgesic king all the way up until 1947. This is when 2 Yale researchers, David Lester and Leon Greenberg, and they were doing some tests on phenacetin, and they realized that when you break this substance down, the actual active ingredient in this substance that is helping with fever and helping with pain is acetaminophen.
Well, let's see how we say that. Acetaminophen.
Then 2 years later, in 1949, Bernard Brodie and Julius Axelrod, they were doing some research as well. They were doing some research on acetanilide, which is the other compound that was used before aspirin, And they realized that the same thing was true for that. It breaks down into acetaminophen, which is the active ingredient that helps fever and reduce pain.
It's just Tylenol. We're just going to get rid of it.
For 50 years, Bayer and aspirin controlled the pain reliever, fever reducer market. After 50 years of use, people were starting to realize that this medication caused serious issues with your stomach. Aspirin would actually eat away at your stomach lining and cause serious inflammation, sometimes leading to peptic ulcers in people's stomachs, especially people who used aspirin regularly. But once they discovered acetaminophen, they realized with this being a broken down chemical, one of the base compounds, maybe without all the extra fluff, it might not cause your skin to be blue, and it might not cause stomach irritation like aspirin. So maybe this was a better, safer alternative for pain reliever and fever reducing than aspirin was at the time. And some of you guys might know it as acetaminophen, some of you might know it as paracetamol, but both of these things are the same compound. They're just different names for this compound. And these names stem from the actual scientific name, which is N-acetyl para-aminophenol. Why do medical names have to be so challenging and difficult and make zero sense at all? In an effort to compete with aspirin, in 1950, a company called Squibb released a product called Trigesic, and this product was a combination of caffeine, aspirin, and paracetamol, or acetaminophen. And this product was not very successful. In fact, it was recalled and discontinued only a year later. And the reason for that is because it caused what is known as some sort of blood dyscrasia. And dyscrasia just means some sort of disorder that they don't really understand quite yet. Eventually, they would realize that what it actually did was it lowered the number of white blood cells in your blood, and it's a disorder known as agranulocytosis. So it might help you with your fever or your pain, but it's going to lower your white blood cell count to a point where you can't fight off infection. So you're going to get sick, you're going to stay sick, and you're going to be way more susceptible to illnesses that you'd normally have no problem fighting off. In 1952, paracetamol actually makes a return, but it's a prescription med at this point. So you actually have to talk with a doctor and have them write you a prescription for it. But then a company named McNeil Laboratories is looking to offer up a better alternative to aspirin, because even though aspirin does work, like I said, it destroys your stomach, and people are really starting to get sick of having to deal with a super upset stomach or stomach issues when they were just trying to take care of a fever or help with some pain. So in order to do this, they decided to try and bring this new paracetamol substance to market as an over-the-counter medication. And they figured they might as well just isolate it instead of combining it with aspirin and caffeine, because those two things, as well as the combination of all three together, seems to be what's causing this agranulocytosis. This is when McNeil Labs coins the term acetaminophen.
Acetaminophen.
And they release in 1955 their very own version of this pain reliever fever reducer that is just the isolated acetaminophen compound. And this is supposed to be a direct competitor with aspirin. But that name, though, nobody's going to be able to say that. So that's why they decided to make it a whole lot more marketable, and they shortened the name by taking two little pieces of it, and that's when we get Tylenol.
Let's go.
Tylenol. All right, welcome back to Sobering Stories with me, DJ Petrovsky. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you're a returning subscriber, sup sobers. Go ahead and do me a huge favor, hype this video up right now. Click that like button. If you're not subscribed, make sure you're subscribed and hit that button. But each and every one of those little buttons really does help me out, and I could sure use the help right now. So, yeah. Now, I did want to stop and take a quick second to let you guys know about our amazing sponsor for this week, and that is going to be Johnson & Johnson, the makers of Tylenol. Now, they wanted me to make sure to let you guys know that the recent allegations made by Donald Trump and RFK Jr. that Tylenol leads to children having autism or ADHD are entirely false. So go out, pick yourself up some extra strength Tylenol or some children's strength Tylenol and just completely disregard everything that they have said. Thank you for listening to a message from our sponsors. And thank you, Tylenol, for sponsoring this episode. Also, Tylenol is not sponsoring this episode. Now, this video will be the first in a series that I've created really just to give me a break from doing the super long videos because it's kind of a grind. And so in an effort to come up with a shorter video idea, I was like, oh, you know what? Maybe I could do some deep dives on actual drugs themselves. We'll look at all different drugs eventually, but I wanted to start with the Tylenol thing because, well, it just seemed relevant and interesting. And I've been seeing all this stuff about the Tylenol and autism memes everywhere, and I wanted to look into like how realistic and how like legit are these claims. So let me know in the comments what you think, and if there's one particular drug or something that you want me to cover, drop it in the comments. On August 14th of 2025, a medical study was done where they were analyzing 46 previous studies worldwide of pregnant women who had taken acetaminophen during their pregnancy. Now, this study was published in August and essentially said that there is a possible correlation between women who take acetaminophen products during pregnancy to help with fever or pain and the presence of autism in those same children. The study did not prove causation, but it said that there was a high likelihood of correlation between the two. This causes the FDA, not even a month later, to start telling pregnant women to avoid taking any sort of acetaminophen products, as well as reaching out to doctors and re-educating them on the potential risks of telling their pregnant patients to use any of these products. It could lead to autism or ADHD. This study is one of many observational studies that have been conducted since the start of the Autism Data Science Initiative that RFK put in place in May of 2025. Each one of these observational studies has noted that there is an association between frequent or prolonged acetaminophen use and these developmental neurological disorders, things like autism and ADHD. However, none of them have proven causation. But it has sparked more interest in the topic, and it's caused a lot more people and scientists, researchers to be looking into this, to really start doing these studies that are isolating different neurological disorders and figuring out if this is a legitimate cause or if this is just some sort of association between the two. Earlier this month, in October of 2025, Donald Trump and RFK Jr. hold a press conference where they discuss the dangers of pregnant women taking acetaminophen during their pregnancy.
So taking, not good. All right, I'll say it. It's not good. For instance, in cases of extremely high fever, that you feel you can't tough it out, you can't do it. I guess there's that. It's a small number of cases, I think. But if you can't tough it out, if you can't do it, that's what you're going to have to do. You'll take a Tylenol, but it'll be very sparingly. All pregnant women should talk to their doctors for more information about limiting the use of this medication while pregnant. So ideally, you don't take it at all, but if you can't tough it out, if there's a problem, you're going to end up doing it.
They talk about how there is a direct association between those two things and children being born with autism. And this is a part of a bigger initiative of them trying to figure out why the autism rate has spiked so high in the last 20 to 40 years. And it's continued to get higher and higher each year. And I mean, that's fair because in 1980, 3 to 5 children out of 10,000 were diagnosed with autism. But in 2025, a study showed that 1 in 31 children had autism. So that went from 0.5% up to 3.5% in just a matter of about 40 years. Now, of course, part of this could be attributed to the fact that we now know more about autism. We're able to diagnose it more easily and better, and we're also more understanding about what autism actually is. So, of course, there's going to be more diagnosed cases now because we actually know what it is. We can spot it easier. But because of the prevalence of it, we've realized that the numbers have definitely grown. It's not just us being more aware of it. The numbers have gotten so high that it actually was not even our choice to start learning more about it. We had to start figuring it out because there's more and more cases that keep popping up. But there was two things that I found to be very strange about this whole situation. First of all, Donald Trump can't say the word acetaminophen.
Well, let's see how we say that.
So instead, he just uses Tylenol because that is a common product that has acetaminophen in it. Now, there is hundreds of other products that also have acetaminophen in it, but that is certainly one of the most common household items that contains it. The second thing I found to be strange is that these studies have not proven causation. They have not proven that acetaminophen directly leads to children being born with neurodevelopmental issues. And yet we have our government coming out and saying that it is extremely risky and to avoid it. We've got the FDA putting new labels and warnings on the packaging of these products. And we've got this massive wave of people that are wondering, does Tylenol really cause autism? And I was one of those people.
What are you trying to say?
If Trump says that the acetaminophen is bad, then when pregnant women take Tylenol PM, then does it only affect the baby after it's born at night? Does it give it like...
Whoa, there's so much to digest here. What?
Does it only affect the baby at nighttime?
Because it's Tylenol PM?
Yes.
Do you think Tylenol PM only affects you at night?
Yes.
What if you take it during the day?
But you're not supposed to take it during the day.
So I was looking into it, trying to figure out how likely is it that Tylenol really does lead to these neurodevelopmental issues. Now, the first thing that I will say, as we've already discussed, is that acetaminophen is a direct byproduct of coal tar sludge. That is what we're putting into our bodies to help us with our fever. And another thing that I learned recently, that I don't know how I didn't realize this before, is that a fever is a good thing.
Fevers. Before you reach for your next dose of Tylenol or Motrin, know this. Fever helps our bodies defend against invaders. When a virus comes into our body with its 50 friends, it uses our body as a photocopy machine. The virus cannot live on its own. It needs our body to replicate itself. When the body is under attack, it raises the thermostat, so now we have a fever. When the body is hot, it produces more antibodies, and the antibodies work more efficiently when the body's hot. Also, at higher temperatures, the body basically turns off the photocopy machine so the virus can no longer replicate itself. If we stop the fever by giving our children too much Motrin and Tylenol, it slows down the immune system from working, it allows the virus to continually replicate itself, and now the kids are sick for 10 to 14 days.
When your body gets extremely hot, that's your body's way of creating an environment that these parasites, these viruses and bacteria are unable to thrive. So it essentially kills them right then and there because the temperature is so high. So a fever, if you then take this pill that's going to lower your fever, you're allowing the sickness to stay longer in your system. You're keeping your own body from healing itself, which is going to keep you from being able to do that as effectively in the future. Your body has its own mechanisms for healing, and we've got to let those processes work. But the other thing I realized is that this is a product that's been produced by Big Pharma, and I have a pretty healthy disdain for Big Pharma. They do not have our best interest in mind. In fact, the only thing they have in mind is our pocketbooks. They want us to spend as much money on healthcare as humanly possible. They want to make up diseases so that you feel like you have to go out and buy XYZ product so that you are protected, safe. It's insane how much money they make off of fear-mongering because of your health. And there is not a single company out there that exemplifies this more than Johnson & Johnson. But of course, Johnson & Johnson didn't start that way. They started as a very wholesome, family-owned company. And what they provided and the services and the products they offered were actually extremely helpful, and they revolutionized the medical field. In the late 1800s, after the Civil War, as most of you guys know, gangrene and just unsterilized medical procedures were leading to more deaths and people losing limbs and just intense illnesses based on these unsterile procedures. It became very apparent to the Johnson brothers that this could be a place for them to make their way into the medical field and start producing sterilized bandages, sterilized sutures, sterilized medical equipment that people can then use when they're doing these different procedures. And it's clearly very important because if you don't, this is how people end up with these awful infections and sometimes they end up dying from it. Now, you might be like me, and you might have been fooled into thinking that there was only 2 Johnson brothers, but in fact, there were 3. Robert, James, and Edward Johnson. Now, Robert Wood Johnson actually started a company in 1873 with another guy. They called it Seabury and Johnson, and they made medicated plasters, which are essentially like, I don't know, they're kind of like Band-Aids that have some sort of medication on them so that you can put them on you and then they deliver some sort of medication to you. So he was already kind of involved in the medical field at this point, but eventually he realized that there was a huge need for sterilized medical materials. The first idea that he had come up with was sterilized gauze pads. Some of their first popularized products were not only the sterilized gauze pads, but also sterilized sutures, because then you could seal up wounds without contaminating the person with the sutures that you were using. Once you sealed the wound up with these sutures, people were still getting contaminated because they were using these reusable like sea sponges to clean these wounds. So that's when they decided to come out with a sterilized, antiseptic, disposable like sponge that you could use. This would allow you to clean a wound and then just toss it in the trash. And this would kind of start the whole disposable culture that we now see in the medical industry. I mean, they literally use it single use and toss it, everything. In 1888, they actually had the most amazing marketing technique ever. They published a sterile surgery guide, and then they freely distributed that guide so that people in the medical industry could see the benefits of using sterilized sutures, sterilized gauze pads, sterilized equipment in general, which is only going to boost their sales, because once people realize how important it is to use sterilized stuff, where are they going to find it? Oh, Johnson & Johnson. Truthfully, Johnson & Johnson was revolutionizing the medical world. They were starting to make things like at-home maternity kits so that mothers who were giving birth at home had different medical supplies they might need, because most babies weren't being born at a hospital like they are now. They were being born at home in a really unsterile environment with no medical supplies or anything really to help. So they started supplying these. They also came out with the very first aid kit, which, as many of you guys know, everybody has a first aid kit now. And they also started giving away these different plasters and different medications to people in poor areas, particularly in the New Jersey area where they were incorporated at. So you could really say that Johnson & Johnson laid the framework for our current medical system, the way that we see it now, and the way that we use sterilized everything now. But in 1894, they decided to come out with a new product to help with these newborn babies and these at-home births, and they included it in their maternity kits, and that was a talc-based baby powder. Then in 1901, following the same blueprint that they used previously with the whole sterilized surgery guide, they release a handbook on first aid, which essentially is a guidebook for everybody to use first aid techniques that they have created, use the products they have created. Obviously, this drives sales and traffic right back to Johnson & Johnson. It's genius. Johnson & Johnson would go on to make sanitary diapers for babies. They would also, in 1920, be the first company to create an adhesive gauze bandage, which you would obviously know to be a Band-Aid. And in that same year, they also came out with a new baby soap. So it seems like they're really focusing their efforts on not only sterilized surgical and medical supplies, but also different baby medical supplies or baby care items. But the success of the company was so great at this point that in 1924, they expanded internationally. And so Johnson & Johnson would start to appear in Canada and then overseas as well in Europe. By 1934, all of the Johnson brothers, that being Robert, Edward, and James, had all passed away. And of course, the presidency and CEO-ship of the company would then get passed down to Robert Woods Johnson II. He would keep the company rolling fairly steadily, but in 1944, they were looking to gain more capital, get more money so they could expand further. And in order to do that, they decided to take the company public and open up stock options, which would then give most of the ownership to the stockholders, and the Johnson family would only hold on to some of that ownership. And in typical fashion, as soon as a company goes public, it becomes corrupted because it comes back to money. Everything is about the shareholders and being profitable, and it's no longer about actually coming up with products that are going to help the general public and have a positive impact on the world. Now, during the early 1900s, while all of this was going on with Johnson & Johnson, something else was happening in the medical world that was sparked by Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. Now, the Rockefellers had gotten rich from their participation in the oil industry, of course, with Standard Oil. As we talked about earlier, a huge byproduct of this petroleum and oil industry is all of these new chemicals that are being synthesized to try and treat different ailments. John Rockefeller really wanted to be able to push these new chemicals and these new byproducts from the oil industry so that he could not only monopolize oil, but he could also monopolize the byproducts of oil, being the pharmaceutical and medical industry. This led Andrew Carnegie of the Carnegie Foundation to write up a report on the state of medical education in America, basically telling people that the state of education in America in the medical field was not where it needed to be, and there needed to be a huge restructuring of the education for medical professionals. Because at this time, natural remedies were pretty much how people administered medicine. It was all very Eastern, natural, homeopathic remedies. But of course, that doesn't really make money. And in order to monopolize the pharmaceutical industry, he's got to create a need for these different pharmaceuticals, a need for these different pills. Because according to John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie, they wanted to come up with a medical system that would create a pill for every ill.
Our culture, through advertising, is spending an enormous amount of money pushing the idea that there is a pill for every ill. Name a symptom, there's a pill to treat it.
A pill or a cream, an ointment or a powder. If you were to infer the condition of our average citizen from the pharmaceutical commercials shown every day on television, you would have to conclude that there is not a square inch of American epidermis that could not be improved by the application of one chemical or another, head to toe.
I can't believe I'm losing my hair back here.
I need 2 hands for itching and 2 more for flaking.
When your eyes get itchy and red,
What does a girl have to do to get clear skin?
reduce sprinkles and brown spots.
Winter itch.
For fast relief, itch, rash.
I don't want to live with pain.
Dreaded yeast infection.
Male itch. I still had the male itch.
Ever suffered from the itch and pain of hemorrhoids? Most people will only discuss it with their doctor.
On the bottom of my legs.
That foot odor. Can anything stop it?
And those are simply the remedies for what can be seen or touched. As for the internal ailments that afflict us,
The minute I take Malox, I know help is on the way.
Take Excedrin in the green bottle. You could take this for your stuffy nose, this for chest congestion and cough, this for pain.
I've been taking them for my heartburn, sometimes 4 or 5 a day.
You know, gas, bloating.
one little caplet.
Congestion.
Pain gets tough.
1,000 milligrams of fat. Medicine for pain.
Heartburn. Pressure.
Indigestion. Sinus headache. 2 Advil. Tylenol. Then Zantac. All the medicine you need to relieve your major chest cold. And I've had headache. Does it all.
And not just a pill for the ill that would fix the problem. He wanted a pill for every ill that you could take repeatedly. So you'd take it when you're feeling one way, but then you feel better, and then when you're having that same issue later on, you take that pill again. He's trying to create this whole pharmaceutical-based medical system so that people will turn to these pharmaceuticals as opposed to turning to these natural remedies. And it seemed to be working. But this re-education of the medical field and this restructuring of the medical world from natural homeopathic medicine to pharmaceutical-based medicine is where we get the invention and the creation of what we now know as Big Pharma. Creating these pharmaceuticals to sell you so that you take it, which may cause one thing to be fixed, but cause 4 other issues. But really, it's just giving you these medications that you're going to have to keep coming back to use over and over and over. And of course, John D. Rockefeller benefits because all of these chemicals are being produced from petroleum, and he holds a monopoly on the oil industry at that time. So with Johnson & Johnson now being a publicly traded stock ownership company, then obviously profit is going to be king. In order to make better profits, then they have to figure out what's going to be profitable in the medical world. In 1953, Johnson & Johnson released their No More Tears baby shampoo, which was supposed to keep babies from getting soap in their eyes, which really burned and was super uncomfortable. But of course, many of you guys know that, well, it still caused tears. That stuff still burns. And over the years, they had to remove more and more ingredients from the shampoo to make sure that it actually didn't cause tears. And one of those things they had to remove was formaldehyde from baby shampoo.
Today in America, 11,000 babies will be born.
And while someday they may perform solo recitals and win Nobel Prizes, Johnson & Johnson knows that during their first weeks of life, they may not have fully developed the ability to blink or tear. Knowing the smallest details about babies' eyes, we made Johnson's baby shampoo mild enough for newborns. It's as gentle to the eyes as pure water and the #1 choice of hospitals. Johnson's, where the best ideas for babies are born.
Random tests conducted on 2 batches of Johnson & Johnson's baby shampoo samples in Rajasthan have found traces of chemical formaldehyde, a known carcinogen. This comes just a few months after the authorities launched an investigation into Johnson's baby powder to see if it contains cancer-causing asbestos. But Johnson & Johnson has rejected the findings of the latest report and have now gone in for an appeal on the report.
No more tears. In 1955, a company called McNeil Laboratories was actually pioneering a lot of the research and drugs that were coming out at this time. McNeil has this whole acetaminophen Tylenol product that they've just come out with. And then they also come out with this children's Tylenol Elixir, which is like a little Tylenol drink that's supposed to help kids with fever and aches and whatever else. These products are extremely successful for McNeil Labs. So in 1959, Johnson & Johnson decides that they're just going to acquire McNeil Laboratories, and they become the major distributor of this new product, Tylenol. And in 1960, they were actually able to sell Tylenol without a prescription for the first time, and it became an over-the-counter medication. Truly, it became a household item at that point. I mean, shoot. I got some right here. Johnson & Johnson would quickly become a household name, and for 20 years, they wouldn't have really many issues at all. But once people started to do more research as to what is in these products and what's actually going into their bodies, well, then the lawsuits never stopped. And it became very apparent that Johnson & Johnson cares more about profits than it does people, because nearly every single product that they came out with that was popularized and widely used by its customer base would have some sort of negative repercussions or some sort of negative side effects that were really serious. In the 1970s, we started to become more knowledgeable about asbestos and the harmful effects of asbestos on humans. And that's when we realized that talc and asbestos are mined in very similar areas. And there's a high likelihood that talc products could be very much contaminated by asbestos because of their proximity to each other. They implemented multiple different regulations to try and regulate the industry, but unfortunately they allowed the companies to self-regulate, which is never a good idea because obviously they were not actually following these regulations. And so these talc powders could very well still have contained asbestos.
I just got off 15-hour shift.
Which is why at the same time Johnson & Johnson was experiencing heavy scrutiny over its talc baby powders and the possible contamination from asbestos in these powders. There was no definitive proof or no definitive case studies that were showing that there was a link between them, but people started speculating that this baby powder might have been causing different forms of cancer, including ovarian cancer.
A new investigation from Reuters claims Johnson & Johnson knew their baby powders knew their baby powder sometimes contained asbestos, but they keep that information secret.
Reuters, which looked at through many company documents spanning multiple decades, reports Johnson & Johnson didn't tell the FDA that at least 3 tests by 3 different labs from 1972 to 1975 had found asbestos in its talc. Now, in a statement to NBC News, Johnson & Johnson said the Reuters article is one-sided, false, and inflammatory. Simply put, the Reuters story is an absurd conspiracy theory. Johnson & Johnson baby powder is safe and asbestos-free.
You know, our story is based on documents. They're Johnson & Johnson's own documents that go back to 1957. They clearly show that the company was receiving reports of small amounts of asbestos in its talc, in the ore that they mined for baby powder. And this information didn't start to come out until this year in a series of trials over whether or not baby powder causes cancer.
Over time, scientific research would find out that mesothelioma, which is a cancer of the lining of your lungs, is almost exclusively caused by exposure to asbestos or different talc powders. And with the number of cases of mesothelioma rising pretty drastically at this period, Well, it only made sense that they had to start looking into possible contaminants, and one of those possible contaminants, knowing that talc and asbestos are very closely related to each other, is obviously this talc baby powder. We have our very first lawsuit suing Johnson & Johnson for exposure to these baby powders, and this would be the first of many lawsuits which would lead to a $4.65 billion expenditure by Johnson & Johnson trying to cover all of these different lawsuit settlements. And get this, they wouldn't even stop selling their talc-based baby powders until 2020. What? Quite possibly one of the biggest stories about Johnson & Johnson comes from 1982 when the Tylenol murders actually happened. 7 people end up poisoned by cyanide, and they are all traced back to them taking these extra-strength Tylenol pills.
American roulette. That's what the Cook County Medical Examiner is calling the deadly game involving cyanide-loaded, extra-strength Tylenol. Investigators believe a madman is responsible for this drug version of Russian roulette, which has taken 7 lives so far. And at a news conference in Chicago, the Chicago Medical Examiner raised another possibility, factory-related. The manufacturer, McNeil Consumer Products, a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson, insists the capsules were tampered with, and the company is offering $100,000 for information leading to the tamperer. As for the victims, all of them were from the Chicago area. The first victim, Mary Kellerman, was 12 years old. She had a cold and sore throat for 2 days before taking the drug. 27-year-old Adam Janis died a few hours later on Wednesday. His 25-year-old brother Stanley and his wife Teresa were upset when they came back from the hospital. They took some capsules from a Tylenol bottle, and they later died. This is 31-year-old Mary McFarland, who took the capsule at her job after feeling ill. 27-year-old Mary Reiner died in the same hospital she left a week ago after having her 4th child. And the latest victim to be discovered, flight attendant Paula Prince, was found in her Chicago apartment, an open bottle of extra-strength Tylenol near her body. In Chicago, Mayor Jane Byrne has banned the sale of all Tylenol, asking residents to turn in their bottles to the police stations where they're keeping track of the point of purchase and the lot numbers to try to track down any other contaminated batches. So far, 3 lots are involved. MC 2880, 191OMD, and the latest to be implicated, 1801MA.
Now, there's a really good documentary on Netflix that goes through the whole story, so I'm not going to go through the whole story here. But if you want to get the background on everything, then you can go watch that. It is really good. It's called the Tylenol Murders. But essentially, they pin it on some random person having gone into different pharmacies or different places that sell Tylenol and exchanging out these bottles with bottles that have the cyanide pills inside of them. Now, just days after these murders occur and people are poisoned by this Tylenol, there's this extortion letter that's sent to Johnson & Johnson that essentially is asking them for money. And if they get this money and they're given what they want, then they'll stop poisoning people with these pills. And they trace this letter back to a guy named James Lewis. Now, the FBI and the Chicago law enforcement all really, truly believe that this James Lewis guy is the guy. But they're never able to actually pin it on him. They're never able to find enough evidence to prove that he did, in fact, exchange these pills out for these cyanide-laced pills. So they are never actually able to charge him for anything. But they are able to prove that he sent this extortion letter.
Authorities believe Lewis wrote an extortion note to the manufacturers of Tylenol demanding $1 million be sent to an account at the Continental Illinois Bank. Investigators shown here at Task Force headquarters in Des Plaines apparently still have no tangible evidence linking Lewis to the Tylenol cyanide murders. Police have been flooded with calls from citizens who believe they have seen Lewis. In photographs released by police, the 36-year-old Lewis is bearded. But a sketch by a Channel 2 artist shows what the 6'1" Lewis might look like without the beard.
Now, his story is that this extortion letter was just a way to capitalize on the news that was going around about the whole Tylenol thing, but he didn't actually do anything in relation to the Tylenol murders. But that doesn't convince the police. They are dead set on this guy, James Lewis, being the culprit. Police are tipped off about another possible suspect by this bar owner. He says that this guy, Roger Arnold, was in the bar talking about how he had purchased cyanide for personal at-home experiments. And he'd also mentioned that he wants to take people out. And because of this behavior, as well as him just being kind of erratic after going through a recent divorce, he tells the police, like, yo, you should look into this guy. So they look into him, they arrest him, they search his house, they find this book of alchemy, like recipes, so that he can make different poisons and concoctions. And they also find cyanide, and they also just think that he might have something to do with it, but they aren't able to find any actual proof or evidence that he was responsible for these Tylenol murders. He is definitely a weird guy, and he's definitely a little bit sketchy, but they aren't able to actually pin anything on him. So he goes and finds the guy that he thinks ratted him out, and he takes him out. He shoots him to death. And unfortunately, this wasn't the right guy. But regardless, he's still arrested on first-degree murder charges. Initially, it was found that these bottles had been tampered with after they had left the manufacturing facilities. They were distributed to whatever store they were being sold at, and this is where they were actually tampered with. Someone had gone in, taken some Tylenol pills, emptied out the powder inside, replaced it with cyanide, and then put the pills back in the bottle back on the shelf. Now, it was widely accepted that just some crazy maniac was out there poisoning these pills, and this is the person that was responsible for it, especially because there was no packaging like there is now. You could easily just open up the bottle, drop these pills in there, put it back on the shelf, and go about your day. Now we've got the whole triple tamper-evident packaging, so you know for sure if somebody's opened this package, and if they have, then you just stay away from it. But there's two things that pop up that let us know that it might not have been somebody poisoning these people after the fact, after it left the distribution network. Maybe this was something internal with Johnson & Johnson. First of all, in October of 1982, these two sheriff's deputies are stopping to grab a quick bite, and when they pull into the parking lot, they notice that there's these boxes on the ground, and when they pull in, they look at the boxes on the ground, inspecting them, just seeing what they are, and they realize that these are boxes full of Tylenol pill bottles. So it's a massive package that has multiple bottles within it. Looks like it came from a distributor. Both deputies are like messing with these boxes, messing with the powders that are on the ground, and eventually they start to experience really serious effects, like they can't feel their hands, they can't feel their arm, they start to feel really sick and nauseous, and eventually they have to get admitted to the hospital. Come to find out, these Tylenol pill bottles were all contaminated with cyanide. And so though they didn't actually ingest it, it still was starting to have an effect on them just from touching it and handling it.
So they pull up to have their diner break, and they see boxes and distribution boxes of extra-strength Tylenol. Inside of them is 12 six-packs of extra-strength Tylenol. One of the boxes was open. Other ones are skewed, but there's capsules everywhere, bottles, and a pile of powder. So these are there. They touch them. They go in to go eat. And the officer that actually just picked up the capsule becomes ill. They order their food. They're done. So they left the diner immediately. Within an hour, the other deputy became very ill, vomiting, and he went home sick. He pulled over to vomit in his car. They still had no idea what they were just exposed to. These are all symptoms of exposure to cyanide. You can have these reactions, swelling, rashes, vomiting, all of this just by touching it and even breathing it, even outside. What were they doing there? Was that somebody ditched them out? Did somebody was somebody planning their distribution boxes, going to stores?
Wow.
How were they there and why were they there?
So it begs the question, were these bottles tampered with from some crazy maniac after the fact, and for some reason he decided to just dump them out of his car and take off? Or were these tampered or messed with or poisoned before they even left the distribution network? What raises the most suspicion about these pill bottles is that Johnson & Johnson had been on record saying there is no cyanide at any point, at any stage in the process manufacturing Tylenol to where it could possibly be contaminated with cyanide. But then we come to find out that that's totally false.
This could be entirely a red herring. It could be entirely meaningless, and I hope I'm not overstepping my bounds in mentioning this. At a conference yesterday morning, I asked the two representatives from McLean Laboratories if anywhere in the vicinity where Tylenol was being prepared, cyanide was present. The answer was yes. What did they use that for? I was told for quality control studies. I did not go into any detail. My next question simply was, at any time, did you test Tylenol for cyanide? The answer was yes, and it was always negative. Well, what comes to my mind is, why do you test for cyanide? You people take it from here.
So cyanide is actually a very important part of the process, and they say that it's kept in separate rooms, separate areas, but then when they actually take a look and tour the facilities, they find out that it's not under lock and key, it's not separated from the actual manufacturing site, and it's very easily accessible by anybody and everybody. So is Johnson & Johnson responsible for accidentally tainting these pills? Is there some disgruntled employee trying to expose Johnson & Johnson or take the company down? What's going on here? The biggest piece of evidence for me is Mary Reiner, who is the 7th person to have passed away from the Tylenol murders. She actually had left a hospital like 24 hours prior to her passing away. Now, she had taken this extra strength Tylenol, but when they found her body, the only Tylenol bottle they found in her house was a regular strength Tylenol bottle. Within that Tylenol bottle were 6 extra strength Tylenol pills. They looked at these pills and they said it's kind of strange that there's only like 4 to 6 pills in this bottle. Where did they come from and why are they in here? But Mary Reiner's daughter mentions in this documentary that the pills that she had received, the ones that she actually took, which caused her to pass away, were given to her in one of those little bubble packs from the hospital when she left. They were like, here, take these. This is going to help you. And so she took that pill pack home. She popped all the pills out of the little bubble pack. And then she put the extra pills into her own little Tylenol container. And then she must have taken 2 of those pills. Those 2 pills are the ones that ultimately ended up taking her life.
My theory is that my mom had just come home the day before from giving birth from the hospital with her 4th child.
Mm-hmm.
When she came home, usually, and this is proven, that every mother is given a unit dose pack, a 1-day supply of extra strength Tylenol. That was actually one of Johnson & Johnson's big marketing plays. They either give it away for free or it's pennies on the dollar that these hospitals are paying so that way they could use that doctors use most. You know, this is the product that doctors use most.
Right.
But these women are leaving with like a goodie bag. So you've got your formula samples, maybe some diaper things. I'm not sure exactly what was in hers, but it was protocol that, you know, that people leaving the hospital, surgeries also, you know, too, that they leave with an 8 capsule, a unit dose pack of Tylenol. And I believe it was that packet that contained the extra strength, the cyanide loaded extra strength capsules. I'm assuming she buys the regular strength. She discovers the goodie bag, unpacking your suitcase. She takes 2, puts the rest in the regular strength bottle because you got this little packet. And if that is true, my research shows that not only was the hospital in the same distribution chain as all these other victims, but it would also prove that you cannot have a madman going store to store and putting this in because no madman is breaking into a secured hospital pharmacy.
But the point that her daughter brings up in this documentary is that those pills could not have been tampered with by some crazy maniac off the streets. There's no way that that guy is getting into a hospital pharmacy and tampering with bubble pack pills, which are already nearly impossible to tamper with without it being evident. So it begs the question again, did these Tylenol pills come directly from the manufacturing plant already containing cyanide? Unfortunately, these murders go unsolved. Nobody's ever charged. They're never able to pin it on James Lewis or Roger Arnold. So we still have no answers. But the question remains, did Johnson & Johnson inadvertently poison these 7 people? We may never know. Then in 2003, the product Risperdal causes numerous other lawsuits to come at Johnson & Johnson because there's a string of young boys who are developing gynecomastia, which is essentially them growing breasts.
I'm trial lawyer Joe Saunders. I specialize in suing pharmaceutical and medical device companies for products that injure consumers. I've been alarmed over the last few years by the number of cases I've seen of young boys who develop female breasts as a result of taking the drug Risperdal. Risperdal is a drug for emotionally challenged children and adults The Janssen Pharmaceutical Company did not disclose to physicians and parents the potential this drug had to change the hormones in adolescent boys, causing them to grow large female breasts. In some cases, these young boys have had to have breasts surgically removed. The trauma of developing female breasts and undergoing breast removal surgery is horrific. If your son took Risperdal and developed breasts, please contact me for a free case evaluation.
And then there's also a whole string of lawsuits from elderly people who are suffering with dementia, who are also given the same product, but not told about the warnings that it's dangerous for elderly people to take, and it's led to them having a heart attack or going into cardiac arrest. So they're being sued over this product, not fully disclosing the health risks associated with it.
There's also a higher risk of serious health issues, such as strokes and increased mortality. For example, dementia patients taking risperidone have a 3.7% higher risk of mortality compared to those not taking the medication. Given these risks, risperidone is typically recommended for short-term use, up to 6 weeks, and only when non-drug approaches have failed. In summary, while risperidone can be effective in managing psychotic symptoms in dementia patients, it should be used with caution due to its potential side effects and risks.
It was also found to have raised your blood sugar levels, which in some cases could lead to that person developing diabetes. So this Risperdal stuff does not sound like it was well regulated, and they certainly weren't informing the general public about the risk factors associated with it. And hence, there's multiple more lawsuits that come forward. In 1998, Johnson & Johnson had actually purchased this company called Depuy Hips so that they could start manufacturing and producing hip replacement metals. Then in 2010, they actually had to recall a ton of these different hip replacement pieces and parts because the alloys they were using were causing metallosis cobalt poisoning. Metallosis? I don't know. Cobalt poisoning. And not only that, but there was tons of people that were developing tumors because of it, so they were getting cancer from these metals. And there was tons of people that were just experiencing awful pain associated with these hip replacement surgeries. And there was tons of lawsuits yet again coming at Johnson & Johnson because they failed to disclose the risks and the side effects and the possible, serious health consequences that these metals would have once they did this surgery.
As time has passed since the recall, we have learned that many of our clients who had the Depuy ASR system have highly elevated levels of cobalt and chrome in their blood. The Depuy components, the acetabular cup and the femoral head, are made of cobalt and chrome, and with excessive wear, levels of these heavy metals in the blood are increasing. As shown in this computer animation, because of the design of the ASR cup and ball, when the ball rotates within the cup, there is excessive generation of metal ions. Tiny microscopic particles of cobalt and chrome are being released into the patient's bloodstream. The release of these heavy metal ions and fragments into the patient's hip area are causing soft tissue damage, inflammatory reactions, infections, and pseudotumors. With the Depuy ASR hip system, patients are finding that they are experiencing pain, popping, clicking, grinding, irritation, and inflammation of the soft tissues in as little as 2 years after surgery. If you or someone you know has had an ASR total hip replacement, it's important that you seek legal guidance from someone who is familiar with the biology, the medicine, the engineering, and the complications caused by these hips.
We already discussed the string of lawsuits that came through in 2009 over the talc baby powder and the asbestos poisoning because of the mesothelioma as well as numerous other cancer claims, all linked back to this baby powder. And these lawsuits have continued all the way up until today. And like I mentioned before, they didn't even pull this baby powder until 2020. And it was still internationally available until 2023, when they finally pulled it for good. Then in 2018, another string of lawsuits starts coming through against Johnson & Johnson, this time for their role in contributing to the opioid epidemic.
Johnson & Johnson is accused of helping fuel the state's drug epidemic and has been ordered to pay $572 million. Let's go ahead and listen in.
Unintentional prescription drug-related overdoses mounted, leaving in its wake broken homes, families, and communities. We showed how the company repeatedly ignored warnings by the federal government and its own scientific advisors about the dangers of its drugs and the risks of marketing its products in the way it did. The company promoted its products through unbranded campaigns by funding front groups and many patient groups meant to look like grassroots organizations that spread the company's misinformation. We have proven that Johnson & Johnson built its billion-dollar brand out of greed and on the backs of pain and suffering of innocent people.
Johnson & Johnson is a major manufacturer of these different pills, and for that reason, they're a major contributor to the opioid crisis that we are now experiencing. And so they had to pay multi-million-dollar settlements to Washington State as well as New York State for their contribution to this epidemic. And that would bring us up to the very fine year of 2020. COVID-19 was beginning to spread, the pandemic was in full force, and we've got the Moderna and AstraZeneca vaccines that are already available, but Johnson & Johnson comes up with their own vaccine. What's special about their vaccine, you ask? Well, it only requires the one shot. You don't have to take multiple shots. You don't have to do the shot and then the booster later. It's just a one-time deal. You get the one shot and you're done. Now, this vaccine is an mRNA type vaccine, which means they're not actually injecting you with small amounts of COVID-19. They're actually injecting you with these lipid nanoparticles, and these nanoparticles will go in and they bind to your cells, and then they tell your cells how to produce parts of the virus, as well as give your body instructions as to how to fight the virus.
By now, we've heard a lot about the COVID-19 vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna. They use tiny fat bubbles filled with mRNA to train the immune system, an approach that's never been approved before. But the vaccine candidate from Johnson & Johnson uses a technique that scientists have been tinkering with since the 1970s. Scientists take genetic code from the coronavirus's spike protein and insert it into a harmless virus that acts as a transport vehicle.
It's like a spaceship. It brings the genetic code to the cell, and then the cell sees the genetic code and then all of a sudden starts making these spike proteins.
Those spike proteins can't make you sick, but they're enough to familiarize your immune system and generate antibodies so your body is ready to fight off the real coronavirus. Because of this different approach, the J&J vaccine is being tested as a one-dose shot rather than two, and it can be stored in a regular fridge, making distribution easier. It's all because the viral shuttle is less fragile than those fatty bubbles in the mRNA vaccines. The data also revealed that 90% of people who got vaccinated produced powerful antibodies within 29 days, an encouraging sign, but not conclusive.
So they're injecting you with nanoparticles that force your cells to create something new. They're changing your cells. They're forcing your cells to do something they weren't supposed to do. A key thing to note about these types of vaccines is that they are not meant to actually keep you from getting the virus. They're just meant to help you fight the virus better when you do get it. So is this really a vaccine? Or does this just minimize the symptoms that you experience when you end up getting this disease? And if you guys recall from 2020 to 2021, that's pretty much what they said. It'll keep you from getting the really, really awful bad symptoms of COVID-19 as long as you have your vaccine. In 2021, Johnson & Johnson was using this company called Emergent to actually manufacture these vaccines. And at some point, they actually contaminated some of the J&J vaccines with some of the AstraZeneca vaccines. And because of that, they were all completely useless. And I think they lost like 15 million vaccines all at once. So they had to put a pause on the J&J vaccine for a little while. This slight pause caused everybody to lose faith in the vaccine itself. And then once it resumed, and they started manufacturing it again, it just wasn't nearly as popular. Until 2023, they actually pulled the vaccine, which I thought was kind of interesting. And the reason they pulled the vaccine is for a reason we've talked about multiple times on this channel. The vaccine was proven to have caused blood clots, which those blood clots would make their way through the person's bloodstream, get stuck in their heart, cause them to have a heart attack, and they would die.
Be especially careful this Mother's Day weekend so family gatherings don't turn into super spreader events.
From smiling with her family to an agonizing hospital stay, 51-year-old Nicole Audia says the Johnson & Johnson vaccine sent her into a physical tailspin.
I was in the hospital for 6 weeks. I was out of work for 10. My heart will never be the same, and that's stinks.
The mother from Hopewell Junction says 2 weeks after getting the J&J shot, she had a stroke. Her hair fell out in clumps, and doctors injected her with massive amounts of steroids to help calm her body's extreme reaction.
I mean, I had a fever for 5 weeks straight.
According to the CDC, more than 18.7 million doses of the J&J vaccine have been administered in the U.S. 60 cases of a rare blood clot condition called TTS have been confirmed, including 9 deaths. The FDA is now recommending people not get the single-shot vaccine unless it's the only one available, or they won't otherwise get vaccinated.
Fast forward to 2025, and we're sitting here talking about whether or not Johnson & Johnson's bread and butter, Tylenol, is something that may or may not cause autism and ADHD in children. So the question I have for you guys is, can we really trust Johnson & Johnson? I mean, they have a long history of peddling poisons to people and not letting them know about the possible side effects, the possible risks involved. They have a long history of putting profits over people, and pretty much every single mainstream product that they've ever come out with has ended in it being pulled and numerous lawsuits being filed because of the damages, the deaths, the just adverse side effects that people experience from the product that they've been selling for years. And with all of these other things set aside, it has been scientifically proven that acetaminophen, which is the #1 active ingredient in Tylenol, is the #1 cause of acute liver failure in history. If you take too much acetaminophen at once, or if you take too much of it for a prolonged period of time, you could send your body into acute liver failure, and you could either end up on a transplant list or you could die from it. And I just want to reiterate the fact that acetaminophen is a direct byproduct of coal tar. Why would we want to put that in our bodies? So do I think that Tylenol or acetaminophen directly correlates or causes autism and ADHD? Well, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did. RFK Jr. and Trump also mentioned the fact that vaccines and other things were being looked at as potential causes of autism and ADHD. So they're certainly looking at all different aspects of it, but I would be inclined to agree with Donald Trump and RFK Jr. on this issue, because no matter what, whether or not it causes autism or ADHD or not, it isn't necessarily the best thing for you to be putting into your body. I mean, if you were to think about a pregnant woman putting petroleum byproducts into their body while pregnant, you probably wouldn't think that'd be a good idea, right? Right, I wouldn't either. So to think that these petroleum byproducts could potentially be causing neurodevelopmental disorders, or worse, other issues, isn't too far-fetched. But if we really consider the fact that we are not only experiencing these petroleum byproducts in our medicines, we're also being force-fed vaccines, we're also eating poison in our food, there are so many factors that go into whether or not a person develops these neurodevelopmental disorders or not. It would be very, very hard to pinpoint one single thing as the cause of all of these different disorders emerging and becoming more prevalent. Instead, I would be more inclined to say that just the general progression of humanity getting us to the point where now we don't believe in homeopathic natural medicine. We take a pill for every ill, and our food is essentially poisoned by glyphosate and all these other chemicals that they're spraying on it. And sometimes we're eating fake meat that is literally lab-grown meat. Like, come on, you guys. Maybe Tylenol does cause autism and ADHD, but maybe it is just one of many things that has contributed to the prevalence of these different neurological, physical, mental disorders. But one thing's for sure, Johnson & Johnson has paid $25.6 billion in settlement money, which means the products they're making are not trustworthy, and they are affecting people in a negative way so badly that they have to come back after them in the form of a lawsuit because, well, these products are not helping them. They're hurting them. They're hurting people. So I don't know, you guys. Is Johnson & Johnson really a trustworthy company? Do we really want to continue putting these petroleum byproducts into our bodies? I don't think so. Instead, the next time you're experiencing a headache, try and figure out, why do you have that headache? Did you drink enough water today? Did you get enough sleep today? Are you detoxing from caffeine, which is usually why I end up with a headache? And remember, there's natural remedies for things. You can use hot and cold compresses. You can put an ice pack on your head. You can use ginger and garlic. Those are good ways to fight headaches, fevers, different ailments that are affecting the body. There are natural remedies that you can use to help you with these different issues. Just masking the symptoms is not healthcare, but there's a reason why you're getting that headache. There's a reason why you're experiencing that fever. And just to reiterate, your body's natural defense mechanism is running a fever, getting your body so hot that that bacterial infection or that viral infection cannot even survive anymore. Now, that's not to say that you should never, ever take Tylenol. You should never take acetaminophen. That's not what I'm saying. In fact, as a pregnant woman, you could be very at risk if you develop an extremely high fever, which could put you and the baby at risk. The lesser of two evils, I would probably just take the Tylenol at that point. And unfortunately, that's really the only thing that pregnant women are able to have to help with aches and pains and fever. So it's certainly something that you can take, but I would not make a habit out of taking it. Just limit your use of it because it's not healthy for you. It's poison. And you should never turn to a pill to fix any of your health issues. There is no such thing as a pill that will fix your health issues. The only thing that will fix your health issues are lifestyle changes and healthy choices. But I want to know what you guys think. Do you think that Tylenol or acetaminophen is causing autism and ADHD in our young people? Is it actually contributing to a rise in these neurodevelopmental diseases and disorders? Or is this just something that's totally made up? Is this just a way for them to attack Johnson & Johnson? Because the one question I was continuously revisiting was, did somebody really want to bring down Johnson & Johnson in 1982 with these Tylenol murders? And then now, yet again, Tylenol is very pacifically being attacked by RFK Jr. and President Trump. Is there a reason why Johnson & Johnson is being attacked in this way? Do people have it out for them? Do they want this company to fail? Honestly, maybe they do, because clearly they're not making products that are good for us. They're pushing poisons. It's a poison empire. Poison for profit. But I appreciate you guys chilling and listening to the Johnson & Johnson Poison Empire story. I'm doing a little bit of experimenting because I'm trying to just ramp the channel's growth up as much as I possibly can. It's taken a huge dip. We're in a huge lull. And then not only that, but this week I was just burnt out, you guys, doing these hour and 45-minute long episodes week in and week out. It's just a lot. But yeah, so just let me know what you guys think. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you guys next week for another one. But until then, sleep safe, stay sober, and don't pop that Tylenol. Later, sobers.
Let's go.